It's Living for the People on 91.3 FM WBNY. All right, here we go. Living for the People. This is L. Nathan Hare. Welcome you to our broadcast, focused on providing insight into events shaping our national and regional world and the facts behind those events and policies that are shaping our world for today and for tomorrow. Join us weekly on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. following Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! Program. And of course, you know our program is live, so you can call and you can join our discussion. We really hope that you will. Our number here again is 716-878-5104. That's 716-878-5104. We're also here with our in-studio audience of one, Norm MacArthur. How you doing there, Norm?
Hey, doing pretty good. Good morning, Mr. Hare.
I'm telling you, boy, we got to watch him when he's getting up early in the morning, because we can see that he must have collected a bunch of money, because he's got a great looking shirt on right now. It's the best looking shirt I've seen him have on all year. So he must be scooping up more dollars, when he's not in front of us. We appreciate it, Norm.
Thank you, Mr. Hare.
And we're also here with our citizen of the 21st century, Willie H., who does the live streaming of the program. Without him, we couldn't do this program. Thank you so much, Willie.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Living for the People with L. Nathan Hare.
So we want to take today to talk about the deal. Norm's been wanting me to try to explain this for a while now. This is the deal to raise the debt ceiling. Now, this is a deal that, to put it in context, it's like you got 2 or 3 credit cards, and you've maxed out all of your credit cards, and you've been paying like a monthly note, maybe about 10% of your credit card balance you've been paying every month. But you decided this month you're not willing to pay the 10% anymore. In fact, you're not even willing to pay any of it. You just want to ignore the principal that you owe on your credit card. That's basically the position that the United States was in with this debt ceiling stuff. It basically meant that the United States had bought stuff, whether they bought it and had it in hand now, or they bought it and they're going to receive it in the future. But the United States already obligated itself to the expenditures of these things, and then decided that, well, I know we obligated ourselves to do that stuff, but we don't make as much money as we thought we were going to make, so we're just not going to pay it. That's the way we'll handle it. That's what you all do when you can't pay your bills, right? You just talk to your checkbook and say, checkbook, I don't think we have enough money in the account to be able to pay these checks we're about to write against you. And the checkbook says, well, then don't write the check. And so you say, I agree with you, checkbook. I'm not going to write the checks. We just won't pay these bills. That's essentially what the debt ceiling is all about.
Yeah.
But we're here. So we want to talk a little bit about what actually goes into the debt ceiling bill, some of the framework to help us to understand how this decision-making has to be made. So I titled today's program, What If the Republicans Had Actually Gotten Their Way? And I'm not sure that we had a good understanding of that. The way the media talked about it, it was a duel between Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden, which makes up no sense because Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House. Joe Biden is the president of the entire country. They're not equals as far as their role relationship in government is concerned. But the media tried to make it out like it was, that this was a duel between Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden, not even recognizing that the Senate also has a leader. There's a majority leader in the Senate. That's Mitch McConnell, right? This thing can't move unless Mitch McConnell's House of the Senate also votes for it and agrees to it. So there's at least 3 points where this thing has to be approved before it can go forward. But the media didn't like that. That was too complicated, as a framework. The duel between Kevin McCarthy leading the obstinate Republicans who want all cuts, and more defense and no taxes to lead that group against Joe McCarthy, Joe Biden, who the media presented as a defender of the tax and spend Democrats. As if the Democrats were all progressive liberals and the Republicans were all anarchistic conservatives. I don't think anarchistic is the right word, but you know, they were the hardest right-wing conservatives. That's just not true. There are moderates in the Republican Party, and there are moderates in the Democratic Party. There are really strong right-wing people in the Republican Party, and there's really strong left-wing people in the Democratic Party. But there are some really strong right-wing people in the Democratic Party too. I don't think there's any left-wing people in the Republican Party. I think they would shoot you if they found out that you were a progressive in the Republican Party. If anything, they'd run you out. But what makes up the only portion of the budget that the Republicans were in a position and were talking about is the non-defense discretionary part of the budget. And it's important for us to understand that you got a budget. That budget is made up of mandatory things that you can't say no to. So when I paid all that money for 60 years into my retirement in Social Security, and then there's rules that say how much of that money I get back, you got to give me my money. You can't not pay me the money that you owe me when I've been paying into this system for 60 years, right? So you've got that mandatory part, you know, that those are the things that you can't change. Then there is the what we call the non-defense discretionary part of the budget. So you got the mandatory part of the budget, which we'll talk about. You have the discretionary part of the budget, the two pieces. But in the discretionary part of the budget, you have two other pieces. You have the non-defense discretionary and you have the defense discretionary. So defense discretionary are, you know, when Norm, I know you wanted to go to Iraq and shoot up some people, and a couple of your cousins were already over in Afghanistan shooting up people. And in between, you probably was over in the, you know, Vietnam or someplace starting something somewhere. You all just got to get something going. And since that was discretionary, we lost our pen. Since that was discretionary, that comes out of the defense discretionary part of the budget.
Okay.
Because somebody has to pay for those bullets, right?
Right.
And you didn't pay for them. You used them.
Yes, sir.
We know you used them because we seen your uniforms. We know you used them, right? But you didn't pay for any of them.
That's right.
Willie had a problem with that. Willie's been talking about that for 30 years.
I didn't have a problem with that. I need to know where I'm at here.
Don't back out now, man. You had a problem.
I'm like a pawn he uses on his board.
Willie was looking at the budget and he said, "Wait a minute, man. What's all this war stuff you doing over here? All this voluntary war stuff,
yeah.
right?
Why are you spending all that money? Yeah,
that's my money. That's coming out of my pocket. You can't do that."
I do question that.
But you know, you kept hiring presidents that decided it was okay to, you know, build up the military-industrial complex by.
Well, we know we got to keep our military strong. We got to keep
them strong. Right.
We know that.
So the federal spending is generally divided, as indicated, into the mandatory and discretionary parts of the budget. Mandatory is what they also call direct spending, is determined by the eligibility criteria established by law. So you become eligible for Medicaid. Once you become eligible for Medicaid and you sign your Medicaid applications, whatever Medicaid is supposed to give you, you get. It doesn't matter how many more people end up eligible for Medicaid. You have to pay for all of those people who are eligible. You just have to pay it. So that's a mandatory requirement on you, but you can't put a cap on it. You can't say we're only going to do Medicaid up to $14 and then no more Medicaid. You can't do that. The law requires that you pay Medicaid services for everybody who has applied and has been declared eligible. You have to pay whatever the bill requires you to pay for that population of people for their health care. So that's the mandatory part of the budget. That includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but it also includes farm programs. I'm pretty sure most of us are not consciously present with the notion that the food stamp program, you know, the welfare queens that Ronald Reagan was talking about, that he got elected, you know, to talk about, that the food stamp program is a farm program. Did you know that?
What does farm program mean?
A farm program means how do we keep all of these farms intact in the United States so that you have a food supply for the people that live in the United States?
I got you. Yeah.
So just like with the military-industrial complex, if you shut down all of the plants that make jeeps and bullets and vests, you know, and surface-to-air missiles, if you shut all that stuff down until a war comes along, then you try to pull together 3 million people to go populate these industries within 4 or 5 days to build the stuff that you need to fight the war, you know that wouldn't work. So that's why they continue to put money into the military even when there's no war going on, because you have to keep the military-industrial complex intact all the time, not some of the time. You got to keep it intact all the time.
Okay, yeah.
But you probably had not thought about the reality that you have to keep food intact. If there's no corn, if there's no wheat, if there's no string beans, if there's no peas that you can put on the shelves, you can't eat.
Yeah, that's right.
So the farm business has to be supported all of the time. The infrastructure necessary for us to be able to provide all of the different foods that we eat as a nation, that infrastructure has to be kept intact 100% of the time. I'm just saying, for those of you that feel real, you know, huffy and tough guys, you know, you real Republicans, ask your real Republican friends how they would feel if 1 out of every 100 days you didn't eat at all.
Yeah.
Because we decided we're going to cut back on farm subsidies by 1%. So you're going to have 1 day out of 100 you're not going to eat. Just keep that in mind when you hear people talking about food stamps.
Wow.
They're talking about, you know, oh, these welfare queens, oh, these able-bodied men, especially black men who didn't finish high school, who can't read at a 6th grade level, you know, that stereotype, right? Mm-hmm. Why would we want to give food to those people?
Right.
They're not worthy of food.
Right.
But they're not the people who you're helping. It's Farmer John down the road that has the apple farm, that has the spinach farm, that has the wheat farm, that has the corn farm, that has the pigs, that has the chickens, and so on. Those are the people that are supported by the food stamps program. Don't get this twisted. Don't let the Republicans continue to sell you stuff that sounds true without investigating whether or not it is true. Mm. So when they're telling you that this is wasted money on the food stamps program, you tell those farmers that if you don't get, you know, your $100,000 subsidy a year for you to be able to keep your farms going, whether there's a good crop or a poor crop, for you to keep your farms going, if you don't get that subsidy, how would you feel if you're that farmer?
You know, Mr. Hare, not to try to spin anything on a racially motivated
you can stick it in there.
No, but I'm just saying. Now, when you really look at that and you think about it, we don't have, you know, they project food stamps at us as, you know, a lot of black people are food stamp recipients, you know, and that's the way it's projected. But you don't see, when you make the comparison, too many black farmers out here.
Well, I also want you to be conscious that 70% of the people who receive food stamps, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program,
yes, sir,
70% of those people are white.
Because the population dictates that.
See, and the problem is the white people who make up that 70%, they think that they're a part of the population that doesn't need food stamps. That they think that they're a part of the population we're part of the in group. You know, we're the us's and so on, right? And because they don't process that the food stamps that they're getting are the same food stamps that 6 foot tall, 200-pound,
wow,
non-high school graduate, you know, can't read at the 6th grade level black guy that makes up the stereotype that you got in your mind.
Right.
Well, he's getting the same thing that you're getting.
Right.
Except there are 7 of you getting it for every 3 of him that are getting it.
What used to be fabulous for me to see is like a lot of times you be in Walmart. I was working in Walmart, and you'll see a black family come up and they got all this food, and then you got white counterparts looking, shaking their head like, why do they got all this money to buy this food or what are the articles? That was always funny to me.
But you know what's even funnier is when you go to the cart that's behind the cart of the woman that they were talking about. That cart was being pushed by a white person.
Right.
It had ice cream and toys and gimmicks and all kind of stuff in that cart too.
That's correct.
Right. But it was a white person pushing that cart.
Right.
So you didn't inspect that one. You didn't go ask any questions about their eligibility.
That's
so
what
right?
was funny to me because they always is like they can't afford to buy food.
Norm wants you to stop laughing at that stuff. He said it's not funny.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So I'm just trying to help you with what mandatory spending is all about. That this is stuff that it really is difficult for you to control mandatory spending unless you change the eligibility for those particular pots of expenditure, right? Mm-hmm. And when you start talking about changing the eligibility, that means everybody who you change the eligibility of these services for, everybody winds up losing.
Right.
So if you change the eligibility and say that whatever the Food and Drug Administration says is the baseline amount of food that a person should have per day in order for them to be a healthy person, and then you make a law that says we'll only pay for 90% of whatever that is, that means that everybody's going to be short 10% of what they need for food who's in that eligibility pool. Mm-hmm. Well, that means you're just going to be hungry one day out of 10, right? Or somebody's got to give you a gift, for you to get some additional food to cover that time period. Well, that's a very hard sell. If you said that to the people out loud, to the public, they go crazy. They say, what are you talking about? You can't do that. But what the Republicans did is, instead of saying what they really wanted to cut, they just said how much money they wanted you to cut. And then said, you come up with where the cuts get made. So that's how we get to this discretionary spending. Because the mandatory spending, you had to pass another law. For each one of the mandatory costs that you want to change, you'd have to pass a law to create that expenditure or that decrease in expenditure. But for the discretionary, that means it's not you're not entitled to discretionary. Discretionary means that this is something that the government is just choosing to do, but it's not. But you are not entitled by some particular eligibility criteria that makes you eligible for these non-discretionary costs. So the non-discretionary, it covers things like your drug enforcement. It covers things like your infrastructure for transportation, like bridges and roads,
yes, sir.
And dredging bays and that stuff that we talked about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Willie's still upset about the bridge in Minneapolis. That's not funny.
No, not at all.
69 people were on that bridge when the bridge fell.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when they investigated this thing, that's what really got to me when I first started talking about this several years ago. What got to me about it was that the report said that the bridge hadn't been inspected in several years, that there had been no major infrastructure work to upgrade the bridge to bring it up to modern standards in the last 80 years. They had just driven over this bridge back and forth, and had done nothing more than maybe painted it every now and then.
Mr. Hare, I look at that particular aspect as almost like a pass the buck aspect. You know what I mean? You can't. This is something
that
shouldn't even be considered as discretionary. It's something that should, it should just be every couple of years.
It should just be baseline. You should have some kind of a model that you've created that creates a baseline for every county, every city, every state in the country, for all of the roads, when a road has to be inspected, when a bridge has to be inspected, whatever is the infrastructure, they have to be inspected, and then treatments have to be done to bring these things up to code. And if that costs, it just costs.
I was, and this may be a little bit off the subject, But I was watching something on TV a couple days ago, and it was about erosion.
Right.
And the way that I don't really know how you can inspect or know if a certain area or something is going to erode due to the
Well,
rain.
think about this. When you build a bridge, the bridge is usually over water.
Yeah.
I mean, often.
But I'm talking about something that is not over water. I'm talking about over land, and over time, water comes up under an area and it kind of washes away up underneath.
That's what we mean, because in order for you to support the bridge,
Yeah.
you have to support the bridge on land.
Yeah.
Land underneath the water. That means you got to be able to go under the water and inspect the bridge parts that are underwater.
Yeah.
And you got to make sure that the bridge is intact all of the time. You can't ever say that we'll skip it this year, we'll come back to it,
Right,
2 years
right.
from now. You
Yeah.
can't say that.
Mhm.
It has to be required that you do this maintenance every single time.
Yeah.
So every time we have these budget issues, and we start saying, well, this is something you don't have to do right now. You could do this in 2025. Somebody has to raise their hand and say, excuse me, we can't have that conversation.
Yeah.
You can't do this in 2025. The bridge might fall between now and 2025. We have to inspect everything that must be inspected on schedule every time. And whatever the inspections say we have to do for these things to be safe, that has to be done right then and there.
Yeah.
And if that means the cost of doing the transportation infrastructure goes up by $50 billion, then you're going to have to increase taxes enough for you, or some kind of revenue, to come up with that $50 billion. You can't allow people to be driving over bridges that are not safe.
And that's right.
It's just that simple,
Yeah.
right? So when we talk about the non-defense stuff, that's what we're talking about. I wanted to get back to something before I finished the discussion of the mandatory and discretionary. The mandatory part of the budget right now is, if I'm reading this correctly, is $4.7 trillion. Is that right? No, $4.1 trillion. That's the mandatory part of the budget, $4.1 trillion. The discretionary part of the budget is $2.7 trillion. So discretionary ends up being about a little bit under 70% of the total amount of federal expenditures, and mandatory represents about 70%, maybe a little bit over 70% of total federal expenditures. I'm trying to read my terrible writing, but the largest increases in mandatory expenditures, which is what I was trying to get to, was in 2016, the discretionary part, or the mandatory part of the budget, the discretionary part of the budget in 2016 came to $1.7 trillion. By the time we got to 2022, the discretionary budget went from $1.7 trillion in 2016, it went to $2.7 trillion in 2022. Huge jump.
Yeah.
Why did we have that huge jump? Well, you have to go back to our 21st century citizen, Willie H., who we talked to in 2020. And he said we needed to borrow $6 trillion from the future to pay for the services to meet the needs of people for the recession that was caused, by the collapse of the economy in April, May, and June of 2020. And we needed to pay for all of this, treatment stuff for first research to get vaccines created to deal with COVID-19. How do we deal with all of these people that are made unemployed, enhance unemployment? Willie was getting some of that. $600 extra dollars. He got $4 of regular unemployment and $600 in enhanced employment. He got during that time period. All that is money, and that money turns into $6 trillion borrowed from the future to pay for housing. Remember, we weren't paying our rent. For a long time. Students weren't paying on their student loans. We had all kinds of things that were done to deal with the ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to the military stuff that had to be done, in addition to the educational stuff, do you know how many kids fell behind? At least 1/3 of the kids, school-age kids in our society fell more than 1/2 grade level behind during the course of the pandemic. In many schools, kids fell as many as 2 grade levels behind during that time period. All of that had to be made up. You had to do extraordinary things to help people catch up. Go ahead.
Mr. Hare, I'm sitting here looking at something. I just like to ask a question. I take notation, and right now I'm looking at our 2022 military budget was $858 billion.
Yeah, that was a discretionary.
Was that discretionary?
That's discretionary military. Remember, the military itself, none of the military is mandatory. Not $1.
Oh no! Okay, now see, I had that.
Right,
I had that backwards.
Right. So that 885 that you saw, in the budget for military, that's the primary budget for the military. On top of that, there's another almost $300 billion that goes to non-discretionary. Excuse me, I'm saying that wrong. Discretionary military expenditures.
Okay, so that's discretion. So that can go either up or down.
The 886 that you saw, because that budget was $800 for the year that we're in right now.
Okay, and I'm still looking at 2022. Mm-hmm. So everything else was 778 billion. So now here's my, it's just kind of my little synopsis. I'm looking at from 2022 to 2023, what a jump was made we go from 1.7 trillion to 4.1 on a mandatory basis.
Right.
And 2.7, I'm saying 4.1 trillion.
Right. And the 2.7 is what I just talked about. That's the 2.7 in the discretionary.
It's just a heck of a jump.
And remember where that heck of a jump is, because see, you were involved in this one. Willie said you can't blame this one on him. He put this one on you. You and Joe Biden,
me and Joe,
put together a $1.7 trillion omnibus budget that was passed in December of this past year, December of 2022. That 1.7 on top of the $1.7 trillion that was already in the discretionary budget, that put another $1.7 trillion on the tab. They rustled that down so that the net amount of money worked out so that the discretionary part of the budget grew from 1.7 trillion to 2.7 trillion.
Yeah.
That's how we got there. But that included the climate bill, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Control Act. You still haven't paid off your student loan, got to pay that off. Willie H. said that those landlords just ain't gonna get their money. They're not getting paid. Right? Come on, Willie, stand up now and tell the truth. Okay. I mean, I'm just being honest, right? That's what actually has occurred. We talked about this in 2020.
Yeah.
That when they decided they were going to do these moratoriums on rent payments, nobody was putting together money on how we were going to pay these landlords whenever the moratorium ended. Because you can't expect these people to be saving up $1,000. Remember, the rents for low-income people, roughly $900 to $1,000 a month.
Mr. Hare, I was directly involved in that, and I just want to be honest. I feel kind of bad about. I lost a friend rented to me, and I wasn't working. I was having a rough time.
You lost your friend, didn't you?
I did lose a friend due to that.
You better watch the door over there, because he might be still around with a little attitude about you.
Yeah.
You kept a lot of money that belonged to him.
Oh my God! Well, they had different programs where he was able to retrieve a big portion of his money.
Yeah. He said, no. When you bought the apple, you bought the whole apple. You didn't buy a portion of the apple. No. We ain't going for that one, right? So I just want you all to understand what is going on here. The non-defense discretionary budget is everything else. Everything that's not mandatory or is not in the defense discretionary, everything else the government does is in the non-defense discretionary part of the budget. So that includes things like diplomacy, international affairs, science, research, environment, energy, law enforcement, governance, economic security. Do you know the office of the president? The office of the President of the United States, that office, to operate that office, is in the discretionary part of the budget. It's not in the mandatory part of the budget. So you're mandated to have a president, but you're not mandated to have an office that the president gets to operate in.
He's not mandated to have a staff.
There you go.
Yeah.
Or a telephone, right? Healthcare, health research, transportation, economic development, education and training. Those are the core categories of what makes up the discretionary part of the budget. So when the Republicans say that you have to cut the non-defense discretionary part of the budget by 22% or 13%, whatever the number is for the day, they're not telling you what they want to cut. But what are you saying you want to cut? Are you going to cut food stamps? Are you going to cut tuition payments? Are you going to cut subsidies to public school education? Are you going to cut vaccinations for people that have contracted COVID-19, et cetera? I mean, all these things are a part of what we're talking about. This is not in my view, this is not a expenditure problem per se. I think there's always an expenditure problem because these are Americans who are the ones who administer these federal agencies. And Americans are made up, not all of them, but a large number of Americans are cheaters. Yep. See, y'all didn't see, because you all are Americans. That's why you didn't react. But you know good and well that there was an opportunity for you to get $2 and only spend one of those dollars and put the other dollar in your pocket, you would do it. Because that's why stuff is going on right now. They took this COVID-19 relief money, and there may be as much as $300 billion of that money that was wasted because people just cheated, to get their hands on that money. This is when the nation was in an emergency. They cheated people in the midst of an emergency. So this is a cultural norm, in the United States. So it's important for people to understand that. But the core issue here is we have a revenue problem, not necessarily an expenditure problem. Our revenues are not enough. Now, why aren't our revenues enough? Because you all hired a president who in 2017 cut corporate income taxes by 41%, cut personal income taxes by 8%, that you hired somebody in 2000, the second George Bush, who cut personal income taxes by 2 or 3% net. You hired Ronald Reagan that cut the top end personal taxes from 50% down to 35%. All of those cuts are revenues that should have been gone into the Treasury that didn't go in, but our expenditures kept going up. If we control our appetite for tax cuts and paid taxes the way we're supposed to be paying them, we wouldn't be having the problem that we're having right now. Other nations, if we pay taxes at the same rate that the 36 competitor countries to the United States pay taxes, which is around 34% of their gross national product, if we paid on the same level, we would have a $1.5, $1.7 trillion surplus every year. This is not an expenditure problem. This is a revenue problem. And it basically boils down to stinginess on the part of Americans. Americans think it's patriotic to be stingy and not pay taxes to the government that you claim you are so loyal to,
right,
that you love so much.
Yeah.
So I hear the music on, that's kind of frightening and whatnot. We're trying to get something started here. But we'll take a little break. So if you all stick with us, we will see you on the other side of the break here at Living for the People. The number here again is 716-878-5104. You don't have to agree with me, but we would love to hear from you and let us hear your thoughts about what we're saying. 716-878-5104. Hope to hear from you. See you on the other side of the break here at Living for the People, 91.3 FM, WNYB.com.
WBNY.
WBNY.
All right.
91.3 FM.
protect his home and family from disaster, Steve used courage, wisdom, and his camera phone.
That should do it.
Way to go, Steve! By simply taking digital pictures of his family's important documents, Steve can always have them stored safely online, no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
91.3 FM WBNY is proud to present Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman.
Welcome to Democracy Now!
Award-winning investigative journalism.
Is the NRA imploding?
Providing relevant analysis that makes you think.
Secret State Department documents, including evidence of U.S. war crimes.
Fact-finding reports you will not hear elsewhere. Democracy Now! Airs Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. on 91.3 FM WBNY Buffalo. Ready for radio that's challenging, innovative, and encouraging? Tune in, Living for the People.
This is L. Nathan Hare. Join me right here, 91.3 FM WBNY. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 9 a.m. after Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! We'll provide objective analysis regarding current issues. Call 878-5104. It's Living for the People on 91.3 FM WBNY. All right, welcome back to Living for the People. This is L. Nathan here, your host. We're here with Norma Carter, who is our in-studio audience of one. And we have Willie H., our citizen of the 21st century, who does the engineering and makes this program possible. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Hare.
sir.
Absolutely. So listen, the next question before us is, where do we go from here? It's important for us to understand the processes in this country. In this country, all funding legislation, anything that involves moving money, has to begin in the House of Representatives.
Okay.
So even though we hear the big budget deal, the debt relief, which they should not have been tied together. You should do budgets with appropriation bills for each of the departments of government. You should do debt relief, debt ceilings as a separate issue.
Yeah.
Just, are you going to raise the debt ceiling, yes or no? There should not be any other questions to be asked on that subject.
Right.
But when you're in control of a bottleneck and something can't move unless it goes through you, then you can say, well, you can't go through this bottleneck unless you do what I say. And that's what the House of Representatives is doing under the control of Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans right now. There's a bottleneck there that says you can't go any further unless you pass by me, and I won't let you pass by me unless you do what I say. So that's what this negotiation stuff is all about. So now that has occurred, and McCarthy, and they make it sound like this is McCarthy and Joe Biden doing this. That's not true. McCarthy has people who are his best negotiators on his team. Joe Biden has his people who are his best negotiators on his team. Those teams are the ones that have been meeting together and talking. Then they consult with their bosses, and they keep, ticking away at each other's proposals until they come up with something that everybody in that group can agree on. Mm-hmm. But once they have that, now you have to go back to the full House of Representatives and ask them to agree. And you only got 4 votes, swing votes, for the Republicans. So you would need to get virtually every one of the Republicans to agree to this deal. You know that there's going to be a bunch of Republicans that are going to try to hold the country hostage, right?
Yeah, this was the question that I was about. I was just going to ask your opinion and ask, do you think that this is going to be able to go through? Even in the Senate, we have a couple different proponents, Democrats that claim to be Democratic but vote the Republican way, and it's almost like the opposition that we're facing.
Right, but keep in mind that the Democrats who you say won't vote the Republican way are not voting against the bill or the deal because they like what the Republicans are about. They're going to vote against the deal because they don't like what the deal is about, that there are things that they think should not have been included in the debt deal. For example, we didn't talk about this, we can, is the eligibility for food stamps. Right now, an able-bodied person, somebody who's not, physically impaired, and who's 18 to 46, 18 to 46 years old, I think, or is 18 to 49 years old, that person is eligible or has historically been eligible for food stamps.
Right.
If they're working, but if that person is not working at least 20 hours a week, or in training for 20 hours a week, or in some educational program for 20 hours a week, that person can only get food stamps for a total of 3 months out of any consecutive 3-year period.
Mm.
So that was the Republicans' way of putting into the law essentially a value system that and a perspective, a belief system that the Republicans have. The value system is that one must work to eat, no different than Elijah Muhammad, right? One must work to eat. You're not willing to work, then that means you must not be willing to eat.
You can't eat.
Right. So that was the value system. So the idea then was to concretize that in the food stamps eligibility program. So those people that can work must work, and if they don't work, and they could work, but they don't work, they're not eligible to get anything more than what I said, the 3 months of food stamps eligibility out of any consecutive 3-year period. But if you were working, significantly half the week, 20 hours a week, you'd still be eligible for the program, right? So many of the Democrats object to the idea of increasing or decreasing, rather, the eligibility of able-bodied adults for food stamps, because they're saying, number one, they're not that large a population of people. 70% of the people that get food stamps are working right now more than 20 hours a week. So you're not saving money. This is something that you're doing just to punish a particular group of people because you don't like them. You just have in your mind, an anathema to the idea that somebody could be an able-bodied adult and be getting some kind of assistance from the society when they're an able-bodied adult. If they're working and they're feeding themselves as much as they can, then you're willing to give them some help. But if they're not working, there could be a lot of reasons why a person is not working.
Yeah,
right?
definitely so.
So you can't go through all of the nuances of that.
Yeah.
But Democrats are objecting to that. But the Republicans are making like that's a great big deal. So the main thing is that the debt ceiling would limit in the deal that was struck, the debt ceiling would be suspended from now until the inauguration day in January of 2025. Why is that a good thing? It's a good thing because it means you're going to go through the entire presidential primary season and the general election season without having to go through the debt ceiling crisis during that time period. Now, that sounds like it's a good thing, and it is a good thing. But keep in mind, you still have to do budget appropriations. And the very same issues that are being raised about why people didn't want to raise the debt ceiling and wanted to lower the debt ceiling, those same arguments are going to be made about the budget appropriations that are underway right now. So they're basically getting 2 bites at the apple, to harangue people over the exact same issues over and over and over again.
But Mr. Hare, when I think of it, it shouldn't be an issue at all when it comes down to the budget appropriations, because the budget is about future monies. It has nothing to do at all with and also we're talking about a jump from 2023 to 2025.
Right, but the debt ceiling itself is how much money you needed to borrow to pay your bills as your bills come due.
Right.
The budget is the money that you have allocated to spend for each of the existing departments of the federal government. How much money has been allocated and for what particular things is that money allocated for? So essentially the way that this budget deal was set up, the 2024 expenditures for the year that starts October 1 of this year, goes to September 30th of next year, for that period, all the various parts of government funding that goes on right now would stay intact, but you couldn't increase the budgets over what they are right now. But what that does is it locks in the 2023 level of government, a level of expenditures. It locks that in all the way through 2025. So that's a good thing from a budgetary planning, perspective. Now, you have inflation. Inflation may be 4 or 5% over the course of the next year. Well, if your budget has a number that's, say, $1,000, and that's what you're going to spend, but inflation eats up $40 of that $1,000, then you're going to have to reduce your expenditures in that department by that $40 in order for you to stay within that $1,000 framework. So remember what we talked about a few times before. Money counts itself. I mean, my father was a gambler, right? And that's one of the things he taught me when I was very young. Money counts itself, right? And so our reality is that if you're bound by a certain framework of dollars, then all the moves you make have to revolve around that framework. You can't make up magic frameworks.
Yes, sir.
As I said to Willie back in 2020, and Willie jumped on me for a minute until we kind of went back and forth on it, but there is no magic money. We all desire magic money.
Yeah.
And Willie was willing to gamble on that. He said, I hit his hand up. I want to go for some magic money too. And everybody wants magic money.
Mm-hmm.
But on this program, we talk about magic money as a theoretical concept, that's out there in space like Alice in Wonderland. But in reality, there's only real money. And real money is the money you can count on. If inflation in revenue goes up by 2%, but inflation in cost of goods and services goes up by 4%, then you're losing 2% of what you can buy with the revenue that you have year over year.
Mm-hmm.
You have to reduce your expenditures, or you have to increase your revenue. We have done the opposite in our budgeting. We've increased our expenditures, but we have not increased our revenues at the same level that we have increased our expenditures.
Right.
Something has to give. And what I'm suggesting is that you need a framework to figure out what you need to do in order for you to change the picture of the imbalance between your revenues and your expenditures. So I say, look at other countries. Don't just look at yourself, right? Because we have crazy people here. We have Ted Cruz, crazy. Paul Gosar's crazy, what's her name? Green.
Marjorie Taylor.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, crazy, right? Lorraine Bobbert, nuts, and so on. I mean, you can't leave this up to nutty people.
Right.
So where can you get a sensible framework of how to approach the structure of our revenues versus our expenditures? Well, you go to other countries that are similar in terms of their government structures and are similar in terms of their economies, and ask yourself, what do these people do? Are they having the same problem that you're having? If they're only off by 1 or 2% between their revenues and their expenditures, and you're off by, $1.7 trillion, in your revenue and expenditures, maybe you should look at other people and see, well, what are they doing that's different than what I'm doing? If you look at other people, they're taking of their GDP, on average, 34% of their GDP goes back to their federal government to pay for government services. We only take 24%, actually a little bit less than 24%. So that 10% difference works out to be about $3 trillion. If we had $3 trillion more money going into the federal treasury, we would have a surplus of $1.3 trillion right now.
Mr. Hare, just want to ask a quick question. Was you taught us the other day about the plan that President Clinton utilized when we had the surplus when he was in office? Is that the surplus? Did he follow a program from another country? Or
I don't know if he followed it from another country, but I can tell you what he followed. He sat down and said, you guys did these tax cuts, with the second George Bush, he said no more taxes, but he finally raised taxes, but he raised taxes too late to be able to rescue the country from falling into further debt. So when he took over, he said, well, we can't keep doing this. You know what I mean? We got to a point that we were at a surplus, and then we just kept eating away at our surpluses, turning the surpluses into deficits, and we just kept raising the deficits year after year after year. He said, we can't keep doing that. He said, so what are you going to do about it? He said, well, I got 4 years before I'm going to have to run again. So his very first year in office in 1993, he said, I'm raising taxes. And he bullied the Democrats who had control of both houses of the Congress at that point.
Okay.
He bullied them and said, you cannot continue to go forward spending us in the hole. We have to increase our revenue and limit our expenditures. And that's what he did. He put a cap on expenditures and he increased revenue. Because he did that, by the time we got to the year 2000, he had an $236 trillion surplus, and he had an $18 billion debt. Not debt, surplus at that point. We had actually wiped out our debt in year 2000, and we had a actual government surplus of $18 billion. We had a surplus in that year of 2000. Instead of having a deficit that year, we had a $236 billion surplus that year.
Mr. Hare, just real quick, I just need to ask, if this particular way that President Clinton went about doing things was so successful, how come it hasn't been followed afterwards?
Because it's the objective that people have who are in the decision-making powers of this country. If your objective is to reduce taxes for those people that make the most money, if that's your goal, then you reduce taxes. Now, what do you do about expenditures? Well, we start calling people welfare queens. We start calling people predators. We start calling people, grifters, and all kind of names we put on people and say people are undeserving. We have the undeserving poor, and so on. That's the kind of stuff that we do. So we don't pay for affordable housing. So now because we didn't pay for affordable housing in the 1990s, in the year 2023, we have an affordable housing crisis. We are short more than 3 million housing units for the people who are income eligible for supported housing in this country. We're short 3 million housing units. How in the world could we be short that number? Because we haven't been building them. We didn't build them because the people that were ruling the country said, why are we building housing for these low-income people? We should build those $500,000 houses and those $1 million houses for the fat cats and the rich people. Right. And the poor people can get whatever housing people abandon. When they run the housing down and nobody wants it anymore, the poor people can get that housing.
Right.
Well, that doesn't work very well. Look what happened when this COVID-19 thing came about. What was the main thing that kept people getting sick? It was their homes.
Right.
They were getting sick because their homes were contaminated, because you couldn't keep the virus out of their homes. It's that kind of limited thinking, selfish thinking, thinking that supports what's in the interest of those that have, as opposed to what's in the interest of those that need. And that's how we got into the position that we're in right now.
One other question. I know you got the answer to it, but there are more people out here that are in need than there are fat cats.
Oh, no question.
So it would seem to me that they would well, I guess it comes down to voting and getting the right people in office.
All those needy people you just talked about, they got a need to vote. They can't just walk around here being needy.
Right. Yeah.
They got to get off their rear ends and vote.
We got to get the right people in office.
See? And don't go voting for the people like Donald Trump because, I think he's tough. He's a real rough guy. Him being the real rough guy is part of the reason why you're needy right now, because the things that you needed, he defeated. He repealed those things. You need to be really focused on who it is that you're voting for. Now, I'm not saying that we should vote for people that will just vote for every kind of subsidy, on earth for everybody. I'm not saying that. I am saying that you need to articulate as a party, what are the core needs that people have that we need to ensure people are in a position to be able to address.
Yes, sir.
And then once you identify what those things are, you figure out how much of those needs are we fulfilling right now. Whatever the gap is, we should do that. Whatever's over that gap, we should say we're not going to do that unless we're in a position to do it. And then we need to make sure that our revenue matches what the cost is to meet the needs of the people in our society. We just have to do that. There has to be some coherence in our policy. And right now, there isn't. So the big deal you're going to hear right now in the next 4 minutes is going to be from the media telling you who the winners and the losers were. Well, Joe Biden won. Well, Kevin McCarthy won. That's not the way this thing should be framed. The way it should be framed is we should not be in a position that every year we're arguing about the debt ceiling when the debt ceiling is nothing more than you authorizing yourself to pay for things you already authorized yourself to pay for. Mm-hmm. You don't reauthorize something twice. Once you authorize it, then you pay for it.
Right.
Now, if you don't have the kahunas or the integrity to pay for the things you authorized, then we should vote you out. You should not be our representative if you can't have enough integrity to do what you already authorized yourself, to do. So we got that issue. From a Democratic perspective, keeping the discretionary levels of government at the same levels that they are right now is a big bonus for the Democrats' ability to meet the need to fund the needs of the people in this country. Because remember what I told you in 2016 or 2019, the discretionary budget was $1.7 trillion. The discretionary budget for 2023 is $2.7 trillion. So you've got, and that 2.7 was based on that $1.7 trillion omnibus bill that President Biden got signed in December of last year. Because of that, you now have $2.7 trillion as your spending cap for 2024. That's a lot better than what you would have had in 2019. It would have been only 1.7 trillion. Right. So that works out to Democrats' favor, right? Yep. And I know that Pamela Jamapil, however you say her name, the head of the Progressive Caucus, in the House of Representatives, I know that she's having a fit. Oh, it's terrible. It's a terrible budget. Kevin McCarthy's a horrible person, blah, blah, blah. Listen, you should tell her to calm down because she's going to queer the deal, right? You don't need to get to where you're trying to get, instead of biting one apple, you want to bite an apple and a half. Just bite the apple that will meet the needs that we have right now. The other half of that apple we'll try to bite another year. Mm-hmm. But let's try to bite the apple that we got in our mouth right now. She needs to calm down. And her progressive, no disrespect, I know y'all friends of, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you need to put a tape over her mouth too until this thing is over because you got to win. This is not about posturing. Mm-hmm. You got to win. Right. You want to maintain funding for veterans health care. You want to reduce the work requirements on people getting food stamps was actually reduced because so many people were made exempt from those work requirements. But also, the Medicare program was exempted from that work requirements. The Medicaid program was exempted from those work requirements. So that's been a good thing. The $28 billion in unobligated COVID-19 funds, that was a loss to lose that, but the money didn't disappear. That money was used to cover other things in the discretionary part of the budget. That worked out for the Democrats' favor. The Internal Revenue Service funding was the same thing. The $20 billion they moved out of the $80 billion that was allocated for the Internal Revenue Service, it didn't disappear. They just reprogrammed $10 billion of that money for next year to use to pay for other discretionary services, and $10 billion of that money in 2025 pays for other discretionary services. So that money didn't disappear. So it's not a loss, for anybody. The restarting the student loan program, for those of you that are students, wake up. At the end of August, you're going to start paying your student loan bill, okay? Now, Biden did leave in the budget the $10,000 to $20,000 per borrower for the student loan forgiveness for the student loan program. But the Republicans are fighting that in court. And if the courts don't rule in the Democrats' favor, that program is going to disappear.
Wow.
But the money does at least exist in the budget right now. So that's a good thing. And then the climate and energy stuff, the infrastructure stuff that was put into that $1.7 trillion in December, all that money stays intact. It's still in place. So that's a good deal. That's a good deal for the Democrats. Now, you got one more thing in there that you probably didn't know occurred, and you'll probably say, oh, so that's why you guys did the budget. Well, that was an expenditure for the Mountain Valley Pipeline. What's the Mountain Valley Pipeline? It's a natural gas pipeline to carry gas from West Virginia to Virginia. Guess whose district that pipeline is going to start in? Yep, Joe Manchin. Who's Joe Manchin? The same guy who's been holding up stuff for the Democrats for the last 2 years. That Joe Manchin. He made a price that he wanted to be paid in order to get his vote, that you had to put up some money for this natural gas pipeline, even though natural gas pipelines is not what the Biden administration wants to see us investing in, because that's investing in the past rather than investing in the future. So I know you got the music on there. I guess that does that mean something?
That means you should have been off two
minutes ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Blame it on Norm. We thank you so much for listening to us and supporting us. Hopefully we're making some sense and you understand what's going on here. We look forward to talking to you all on Friday here at Living for the People at 91.3 FM WBNY. See you all then.
Come from we call a life giver. While them a make it out to live a life bigger. Them set it with every black youth a crime. Them whining them hate us, still praise we. Them not like we, still imitate we. Them use my grandmother breastfeed them baby. What a journey crazy.